I am so honored and grateful to have the incredible Sam Simon here with me today. And this episode is going to be kind of crazy, a really fun concept. We are going to be guests on each other's podcasts at the same time. So, we're going to be talking about each other's journeys and how our journeys collide and our similar missions and how we like to do advocacy through theater. So, I want to start off by asking you, Sam, why theater? Why did you say, okay, theater is the way I'm going to share my journey. Why?
Because it found me in some ways. It's a strange thing to say. So, hello, everybody. Thank you, Allison, for having me. And I am so impressed with you. And we'll get into that, but you get to start. So, a little bit, I guess, to get there about my background, I am the most unlikely actor in some ways. Um, I refer to myself more generally as a troublemaker. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up, though, in Texas, in El Paso. Not that that's important to my story, um, but I was in law school and I came up to Washington because in 1970, a brand new person came on the scene called whose name was Ralph Nader, and he was the and is still at 92 a major consumer advocate. And I was one of the first people to work for him. So I was all lawyer, troublemaking, working in Washington. I'd done a little theater in high school and college, community theater, and even in the Washington D.C. area, I was doing is a community theater as a hobby. Um, Fast forward, um, spent from 1970 to 2006, that's 36 years or so. But in 2000, Susan, my wife, got very sick. And I went on a journey, um, an existential journey with her, where she had advanced breast cancer. And uh, there was a moment in her illness where the doctors thought that, and she has survived. She is now my love partner, care partner. I call her my cognitive navigator, but we'll get back to that. So she was very sick, and I had to face the moment of anticipating holding her as she would take her last breath. And it was a traumatic experience, but I didn't know it was traumatic. I call it, by the time I figured it out, I call it post traumatic spiritual disorder. I'd been doing community theater. I had actually been trained in improv theater. I was connected. I'd gone through, so you got my career. I'd worked for Ralph Nader. I was a lawyer, public affairs firm. But then I was doing some social justice work in New York. I lived in Washington every other week. I was going to New York and spending the week up there. I was also doing improv. I was being trained in improv theater, professionally trained by some really exceptional people. The one I want to shout out is a couple of people, Gary Austin, the late Gary Austin. He had founded the Groundlings in LA, where all the original Saturday Night Live people had come from. He was a great, tough teacher. And there were folks from the Second City in the theater company I worked with was called Artistic New Directions. And it had been an avocation. I was interested in it. Improv really, I would recommend everybody at any age to do improv training. It changed my life. It, it changed, I had a company of like 40 or 50 people, changed how I was a boss to them, changed my everyday life, and also taught me how to be present on stage. And it led to the discovery of a story I had inside of me. I didn't know it until I started doing some improv exercises and the story started to come out. I created characters because I would try it one day, folks. Talk for 20 minutes without stopping.
Mm.
That was the exercise, improv exercise. So this is my journey into theater, and I was learning a new level of theater through improv and improvisation. It's called theatrical improvisation. You improvise a story that can be then created into actual theater. A guy named Jeffrey Sweet, he's a playwright in New York. That was his and still is his approach. And um, he'd worked with Gary and the group. So I found my first play. It's called The Actual Dance Love's Ultimate Journey Through Breast Cancer. I was the care partner to my wife, Susan, during the time that she was anticipated not to survive. I had a illusion, a dream, an experience where I could imagine Susan and I in some liminal place between here and wherever there is. And we would be dancing and we'd be in the middle of a ballroom and we would be hearing the music of our hearts, that our favorite music, surrounded by everyone we've ever met, ever known, ever loved, maybe even generations from before us, watching as Susan and I would dance as she left. It was a real dream. I imagined that. I turned that into a play. So that's how I got into theater, trauma, right? You can still go to theactualdance.com and there's even a book about it. There's some stuff there. But the big thing, Alison, is that as I was performing, I did it for over a decade. We had the pandemic and I was but I could perform at home over Zoom for Gilda's clubs everywhere and all that. And all of a sudden I started having trouble with my lines. And it was interesting. Susan would be off to the side as I was performing, and she could cue me. And that was an early symptom that something was happening to me. And there are others, we can talk about all that later if we want to, but it was that that ultimately got me into see a neurologist and to discover that I, in fact, do have Alzheimer's disease. And so that's how I got into theater. And I've already taken you to, well, now I've got Alzheimer's. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
And it's not the most obvious thing. Um, I I had by this time had the chance to develop a significant cohort of fellow actors, and one person theater is it's a genre of its own. And I started talking to, just mentioning to people and talking to some of my colleagues. And their advice was uh, write it down, put it on stage. Wasn't obvious. Took me a while. If you get diagnosed with a terminal disease, which is what Alzheimer's is, you don't necessarily run to write a play. There's some people who do. In fact, I may be talking too long, but what happened is early on in this process, there was a podcast and there was a woman, I'm not going to use her name because I don't want to sell her books, was being interviewed who had written a book about how her husband had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and that they had gone to Switzerland for accompanied suicide. And he had indeed um, committed suicide. She was next to him and she wrote a book about it. I'm laughing now because one of the requirements if you go to this place in Switzerland called Dignitas is you can't make money off of it. She went back to the United States and wrote a book. As far as it claims it was a bestseller, and as far as I know, didn't give it any money she made to charity, but that's another thing. I'm not a fan of accompanied suicide. So, I mean, that's a lot at one time. Theater as a means of expression. I could give a shout out to one other place. It was called Intersections International New York. It was a social justice ministry. And my friend had been hired. That's why I started, I had been in Washington. I did all this stuff. Had sold my company, and my friend who was hired to create the social justice ministry wanted me to come up and help and be part of it. And they used theater, music, and art to promote social justice.
Mhm.
And one of the things I learned from them, and his name is the Reverend Robert Chase. I was just on a Zoom with him today. Um, we're still good friends, but one of the things that I learned from working with them, if you want to change people's minds on something, if you want to argue we should change and this is more just or right, you need to go for the heart, not necessarily the head. And theater can do that, and music can do that. And it's not fake, it's not false if it's authentically done, true to the journey or the cause. It can have a huge impact. And I think that's part of what I'm trying to do. So
Yeah.
you get to ask another question. Well, tell
Yeah.
me, first of all, so that's my story. How did you start? You're in theater, you're a young um, actress and student, but you've been doing a podcast about Alzheimer's. Is that it or dementia? Which one would you use?
So, one of the shows that I did had themes around Alzheimer's. So we did touch on that through my podcast, yes.
And how did you end up there? And you've done many, many podcasts.
Mhm.
So, what's your story?
So for me during COVID-19, I was an art student at the time, still am. I was at an arts elementary school. And not being able to go to school, obviously it stripped away my art, which like you said is my self-expression. It stripped away being able to see my friends, being able to talk to people. I am such a people person. You will never not see me talking to people, just learning what their stories are and where they came from and why they do what they do and why they think what they do. That's what I like to do. I like to get deep and just learn about the people that I'm surrounded with. And with COVID-19 quarantine, obviously we couldn't do that because we were all in our homes, and I was just left there like, "Okay, now what?" And I found myself constantly turning to the Jimmy Fallon show or Jimmy Kimmel or the Ellen show, and I just loved hearing people's journeys and just these little interviews, they're like 20 minutes, and just getting to dig at who these people are that I'm so inspired by. I was like, "Okay, I want to start something." And that's when this idea came into my head. And then I saw this movie called Clouds, which is about a young boy named Zach Sobiak. He was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a rare type of bone cancer. And they did this movie about his life. And he was a musician. And he wrote this song called Clouds as his goodbye to the world and his family and his friends. And I was just so inspired by his story and how he used music as his outlet. And that's when I realized, okay, I want to start a podcast. So I started the Inspiration Show. This was 4 years ago. And I started by reaching out to some of my closest family and friends and just asked if I could interview them about their jobs, about their passions, and things like that. And then over the course of 4 or 5 years, it evolved into something I never thought possible beyond my wildest dreams. As I say, it kind of became the heartbeat of my life. I got connected to some of my favorite actors and my favorite dancers, and that led me to really strengthening my passion and my relationship with Broadway and with theater, and that has been so incredibly special. And through that, I've gotten to interview people who've been part of my favorite Broadway shows, and going out to see the shows and things like that has been really special and my deep source of inspiration. And I think too for theater, I always say it is so special when you go see a show and then it comes curtain call and you see all these actors bowing and everyone's standing and clapping, and sometimes the actors are crying or they do these little gestures, they put their hand on their heart, they point up. You don't realize that after you see a show. So for me, I say I love watching these actors bow, But what I love more is learning how they got to that bow. What training did they
Mm.
get? Why theater? Did they make it to Broadway? Because Broadway's not the end all be all. Did they hit a national tour? Did they do community theater growing up? Did they play baseball for 12 years and then decided, I don't like it, I wanna go do theater? That's what I love so much about what I do, is just getting to interview people and learn their stories. And then a friend of mine who I connected with through the podcast, who was in my favorite musical, Dear Evan Hansen, I got to see him in the title role, and I got to interview him, and he became like an older brother to me, like a guiding figure, like all of these incredible actors who I've had the honor of interviewing did. I call them my found family. And he, became this guiding light for me, and then he told me that he was doing a show at a cabaret theater in New York City about his life and his journey, and how he was, this little Latin actor with a passion, and how it got him to playing one of the most iconic roles on Broadway. And I watched that show, and he told his story through song, and I was just so moved. I said, "You know what? I wanna do something like that." So I sat down with him and he talked to me about it, and he said, it's an open submission policy. What do you have to lose? And a mentor of mine who I also interviewed on my podcast, who is really big in the theater scene in New York, the incredible Mark Tuminelli, I reached out to him and I said, I know that you program manage this venue in New York, and I grew up watching some of my favorite Broadway actors bare their heart through song and story on that stage. I said, do you think I could do a show? I have a cast, I have an idea, can we do it? He goes, "Great, when do you wanna do it?" So I wrote this show, and it was called The Journey of Inspiration Through Theater, and I told the story of my life using popular musical theater songs alongside the incredible actors that I crossed paths with through the Inspiration show, who were part of my favorite musicals and who became those older sibling guiding light figures to me. And that helps me transition into my next question, because I wanted to ask you, for me, I had 75 minutes to tell my entire life story. I was 16 at the time. So I was like, okay, how do I pack my life and this journey of mine into 75 minutes? Because I wanted to do a little so how I structured the show was I did a little monologue as to, okay, this is the song you're about to hear, and this is why it is important to my journey. And then I had someone come up and sing it. And then we went through my entire journey through these monologues and through these songs. So it was really special for me to get to monologue my journey, and I also got to sing a little bit, so that was really special, getting to tell the story of my journey with the people who really made my journey what it is. So I wanted to ask you, because I feel for me it was that courage that it took to really stand up there and pour my heart out and be like, this is my story. These were my experiences. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but there were parts of it that were sunshine and rainbows galore. So I wanted to ask you, what was that like, especially with you with your diagnosis? How are you like, okay, this is my life story, and I want to pack it into a play and tell it to an audience? Because what I did was writing those little monologues. I had a place to start because I wanted to cover the significance of why we were singing that song and why it's important to me. So I had a little bit of that guiding, as I like to say, a little writer's prompt. But what was that like for you to kind of just sit in front of a computer and be like, okay, I'm going to write a play about my diagnosis and tell my journey and kind of just pack it all in there and stand on stage and just pour your heart out?
So I have to really talk about it. It was a two-step because I did my wife's story,
Mhm.
my story of my wife's journey, my journey with her.
Yeah.
And I think I need to start with that one. Again, I did not know that I had the story within me.
Mhm.
I found sort of the characters doing some of these improv. Now, I was very lucky. I've been doing some improv work. I had met some people who had improv techniques, and I had met someone who had done a one-person show, and she was also a dramaturg. I didn't even know what the word meant. I know nothing. This the old lawyer. I still think I'm doing troublemaking when I'm in New York, and I'm actually finding out and discovering through this. And so uh, she encouraged me. She helped me write it. I then did a reading. I was stunned by the response to the reading. It, it was it was writing and getting the reactions of telling stories authentically. Now that's a genre of sorts. It is genre. It's what I do. I'm I can't write dialogue because I don't know what other people think.
Right.
It's a, all I have a great admiration for somebody who can come up with a story from both sides and write somebody else's words and put them in somebody else's mouth. I have the ability to tell a story. I'm a bit of a, not a bit, it's a storyteller as well, dramatic storytelling. And it was with strong help. I shout out to Carol Fox Prescott, who was my breath coach. But what does that mean? Um, I, I had to learn how not to overthink things. But I do want to say something that also happened that addresses something you said about not sure you could do something and you ask and you did it. Um, when I finally, for the first time, I'd never done a play, I'm in new territory, and I put a little team. So now I have a director and a dramaturg, and somebody's going to do music. And the first meetings we were working with, all I was hearing was, well, we can't afford that. Or that won't be possible. I said, stop. Assume you have everything you need to do it perfectly. And let's do that. Let's plan that. And if we can't, if we run into roadblocks, then we go down or find alternatives. Don't start below what you think is the ideal. And I would say that to anybody who may be listening and have their own dreams. Don't start off with, oh, well, we can't do that. So
Mhm.
start with what you think would be the best. Now, sometimes you have to then come back from there because now you can't have a 20-person orchestra. You have to have two musicians instead on stage. Okay. And it works. But don't start from below. Don't start from less than what you think. And I was able to do that. I was in a personal position to be able to do that. And, we had to make some things back. But I've had that, been blessed with that attitude and that experience, and I'm lucky to have found that. I've had great, I worked with and, you people who are musicians and who are theater. But that was late in life. I was in my mid to late 60s by the time I'm doing this.
Mhm.
I I wonder sometimes, I keep going back to the improv, where that instinct to do it came from, and I don't have an answer to that. Um, I liked that I was willing to give it a try. That is again improv. Yes, anding, learning. You know, people may have heard it, and they do. So people who don't know about theatrical improv or improv, it's accept all information given, which is a yes, accepting yes, and add information to it. So you're whatever one, two, or three, or four, or five people seeing, you're in the business of, you know, all right, the way I was initially introduced, you'd have two people, and then they ask the audience, where are they and what's their relationship? And then they turn to you and say, go and create a story.
Yep.
And you yes and it, but that's also think about real life doing the same thing. So my in memory, in cognitive decline, there's a woman by the name of Tipa Snow. Give her a shout out. She is she is both a nurse, but she is well known for having implemented improvisational techniques into memory care and yes anding. And every day, it's if there'll be a time when I might be at home and I don't know I'm home. So I say, Susan, take me home. Susan's my wife. Susan, take me home. She says, no, you're home, Sam. Don't be silly. I'm not home for that moment. In my real world, I'm not home. And so she would say, "Yeah, okay, let's go home, Sam. Get your coat on. Let's go outside. Maybe we'll walk around the block, or maybe she'll drive around the block and end up, and then I'll be home." I've seen it. I've seen that happen in real life with people who have done some work in this area. And I've seen Tipa do things like that on some of her teaching work. So improv is very important. I'm lucky. I can do it. I can still do it. I have to have my script. I can't memorize. Um, Susan, I love this. We discovered. Never heard the word cognitive navigator in my life, but I'm writing and I describe my wife as my cognitive navigator, and it's a role, and that and it's an evolving role. I mean, I'm in real life. I've gone from writing a play about and imagining my cognitive navigator to be advocating that we have cognitive navigations as available as curb cuts. I've learned through my disease that it can be 5 to 10 years before I get a lot worse,
Mm.
but I need help along the way. I can still go out. So we have ramps for people in wheelchairs. We didn't, the line in the, I may be off your question, but um, theater is a way of expressing it, I guess, is where we're back at. It found me, I think, and the improv worked, and so I think theater is very powerful. Storytelling is very powerful, and it's a privilege for me to be able to do it for as long as I can do
I always say that being bit by the theater bug was the greatest gift I've ever been
it.
given, and I say the same thing as you. I always say, theater found me. Like, people will interview me or, like, they'll ask me at the stage door, they're like, "Why did you pick theater? Like, how did you know?" And I said, as corny as this is, theater found me. I
Right.
don't I don't remember a life without it. I was always doing shows and singing and dancing around the house when I was little, and then I was in an arts elementary school. I'm a theater major in high school, and it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. And I think it really enhanced my storytelling and the way that I look at life and the way I look at stories. I'm gonna connect what you said about not knowing that you were home with one of the shows. I had the honor of being the smallest part of the Notebook musical on Broadway. So they took the beloved movie The Notebook and they turned it into a musical, but obviously, it has themes of dementia and Alzheimer's, and getting to watch that unfold on stage was the most beautiful thing. Because the way that they did it in the musical is they had, a younger Allie and a younger Noah, and then we had a middle, and then we had an older. So you were watching the same story unfold at different times, and the most beautiful thing is when all of them would come together, and all of the Allies came together for a musical number in the show called I Wanna Go Back. It is such a beautiful piece. The music by Ingrid Michaelson is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, and one of the lines in the song is, "I didn't know that the last time I'd leave the house was the last time I'd leave the house." And, you're watching her younger self and then her teenage self and now her older self, and they're all like, "What's going on?" And the blocking, the music, the orchestrations, everything just came together and tied it up in this most beautiful bow. And Marianne Plunkett, who played the oldest version of Allie, her mother actually has Alzheimer's. So it was beautiful to see, her take on this role and just sitting in the audience and watching this story unfold before my eyes was so beautiful because I think people knew that they were what they were walking into because people obviously knew the Notebook. It's arguably the most iconic love story of all time, if you will. But to see it in a musical and to see it on stage and to really pick out the themes that obviously they touched on in the movie, but we really got deep in the musical. It was so beautiful. It had a short but incredible life on Broadway, and it's heading out on a North American national tour. So I am so excited and grateful that people are going to get to see this story and watch it because this is something you and I talked about earlier that I want to touch on camera as well is how do you deal with theater, I hate saying this, but there's no way to describe it with the touchy subjects because I've worked and had the honor of being part of shows that are considered, the touchy subjects. And people don't consider that, the entertainment quality. When you go see a musical, you want to see the most incredible acting and you want to see tap dancing and music numbers that take your breath away. And obviously, the musicals with the touchy subjects, they have all of that, but they do it in an incredible way where they talk about things that people experience in real life. Like to shout out a couple, you have your Dear Evan Hansen, you have Parade, you have Jagged Little Pill, you have Next to Normal, and it is so beautiful to see how these musicals, I like to use the banana analogy, they peel back the banana and you're watching a musical, but you're like, holy crap, this is real life. And it makes you think while you're watching, and you're not just sitting there enjoying a musical, you're on the edge of your seat being like, oh my goodness, I can relate to someone like older Allie in The Notebook who is going through this. And I just think it's the most beautiful thing when we get to arise important life topics in theater. So I kind of want to dive into that with you because I know there are some people who I don't want to say are against it, but there are some people who are like, okay, I'm coming to the theater, for a nice night out and I don't want to see this. So I want to kind of talk to you about how can we kind of erase and get rid of that stigmatism and that thought because as we always say, theater is a unit for self-expression. So how can we really, enhance that when we apply mental health, when we apply dementia, when we apply suicide, when we apply things like that? How can we make that really, people being like, okay, I want to go and I want to see that?
Well, I can't make anybody do anything. So why don't we maybe even think a little bit about how we talk about it? Um, it built it in both of my shows, it builds its own energy. So how you've already in some ways said it. Maybe we can talk to another set of people here, the producer class, so to speak. Those who can give people opportunities to do things, particularly maybe if they're not quite the biggest dollar maker, at least not intuitively.
Mhm,
Um, that might be um, the place to to focus because the audiences, when they do see it, enjoy it, love it, learn it, are moved by it. By the way, I don't know where we'll fit this in. That I also learn from my own performances. By the way, it's happened now in both shows I've done, and I've been shocked. And you would think, at the second time, Dementia Man is my second show, that I would be shocked to again learn that I learn from my audiences and my own expression of it. But maybe being that authentic on stage is part of what the audience senses and knows and invites them to be there too. Um, the publicity, I don't have a like, how do I convince um, people not to be afraid? It's interesting. In Dementia Man, I haven't had quite the problem or issue with my first show, the actual dance. I had a couple of people have to leave the audience because they thought my wife was going to die and they didn't want to watch that.
mhm.
And we started putting in the introductions the spoiler alert, she doesn't die. Um, and I particularly if somebody themselves has gone through a loss or they had the breast cancer, there are some things people don't want to watch, and I don't want to say you have to watch everything,
Oh, of
but
course.
theater of meaning, which is what I tend to call it, that address life lessons are important. And it could be political stuff too. It's interesting. People might have more entertainment about political, but when it comes to, personal stories and disease and overcoming um, certain life challenges, they may find it too hard. I don't think it is. It's
Mhm.
and when it's well done, as and most often is, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Even I don't know if this answers it, but it's an interesting thing that I could could not have imagined. I did not grow up in the midst of Alzheimer's. In other words, I don't have a real life history of, oh, my mother or my grandfather, and I saw how he did it. This every day is new to me. Uh, but for so long, the first person who raised their hand to speak afterwards, we had to talk back. It was only somebody who said, and it was every time for about 15, 20 shows. I don't know. It was, well, my grandfather or my husband, they had it. And I always wondered what was going on in their head. And I think now I might have some idea.
Mm.
Now, of course, my response is I don't know what was going on in their head. You only heard what was going on in mine, but I'm glad it had meaning for you. But they got so much, it was almost life changing for them
Oh,
to experience that and said, oh, maybe that's what was happening with my loved one when it's going to. They are beautiful. I mean, we've seen beautifully done shows about, you know, various kinds of cancers and the courage it takes to go through. You don't have to have happy endings, many don't, but that's life. And I think theater has a huge amount to offer people of all ages to be able to project their own life story onto what they see on stage and help them understand their own experiences, perhaps differently or the same, and learn from it. And so much for I want to do a shout out. I think it's Mamet. We may have talked to her about it. You know, I didn't go to theater school. I didn't have professional training, but Mamet's the one who said all glory goes to those who just step out onto stage. He wasn't a big fan and get and honor the words on the in the script. And we can't tell people what to think or how to react. That's another thing about theater. It's I I never know what the audience will find. I have not had apart from not talking about whether they like how good an actor or not I am. It's about experiencing the story, and I haven't yet found anybody who walked out on this particular show or felt angry or didn't like it. And I've gotten people who both cried and who found deep meaning. And theater can do that for people. It is a great form of expression, and it's also a form of storytelling. Uh, I would I would first of all, you must be you are a very talented person. We've just met, but you said you have done some theater in New York, right? In have you toured yet? I think
I did a Canadian national tour when I was young.
yeah. So it affects both the actor and the audiences, and it's just such a privilege. I don't know if I would want to do it as a full-time professional all the time, but why not? It just would I found it late, and I'm really glad that I did. And I think there's just a privilege to be able to walk out and tell a story. Um, and I hope that it helps other people because this is tough stuff. Whether you're so, one of the things I learned and have come to understand, and one of the things that we're oddly lucky at, I would never wanted Susan to have her cancer. One of the things we learned about it, though I learned about it, is first of all, what love really means, and to be able to share stories like that to help other people find that being the care partner, but we've each had our now one uh, different, each in each other's shoes. um, so I think I've lost my. I had a critical point here, and I think I've lost it. But I think I would encourage people. By the way, anybody listening and want to do this, go take a writing class, go write your own story, right? Why not? Um, I think we did that. I was in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to do the show in the community center. And the day after the show, we had a group of people, uh, caregiver and somebody with a cognitive impairment. And we spent a day with people writing their stories, and they could do it.
Yeah, I always say that theater is magic, and I think everything you touched on, that is theater's magic. Like for me, the greatest experience is obviously being up there and the lights hit you and you step into these shoes and you get to tell a story and it is so special. But what I love and cherish deeply is, going out the stage door and like you said, the talk backs and now with the power of social media, people reaching out or telling me, that the show really impacted me and I was crying it changed the way I think, or I'm gonna go out and do so and so for this person now. And just seeing the way that a show can hit you, it is so special because when you see theater, you're transported to this whole new world for, let's say, what your average musical is 2.5 hours long. And it's just the most beautiful thing to see how you walk into that theater excited to see a show and you come out a changed person. And what I find is it's so deeply special and unique because then you can share that love with others around you. And it leads to that inspiration. And I always say if a show I've been a part of, or a show I wrote, or something I said in an interview for my podcast, if that inspires or changes one person, my job has been done. My aunt, her
Even if it's you, by the way, I will give you that. Even if it's you.
Yeah. My aunt always says, be the change you wish to see in this world. It's her quote. She makes that her mission. And I think it's so special on how that's rubbed off on me. And my mission with theater is if I can change the world by, telling someone's story or sharing a thought or raising awareness to something, I know that my job is well done and I've put my passion towards something that is important and something that I know I can leave this world doing just a little bit of good. So I wanted to ask you what your advice is to those who want to tell their story or want to get out on stage and write something and they don't know where to start. What would you say looking back after everything that you've experienced?
So maybe we both can do a little help for folks because it might depend on where you are and what the resources you have. Um, give it a try. Um, I think I'd be curious your view on this too, because I was going to ask you, I was listening to you and said, what do you do right before you go on stage? I empty my head. I was taught to get out of my head. But this goes to the same thing. If people want to give this a shot, I've wanted to and not been able to pull it off yet, and I don't know that I have the time to pull it off. But I mentioned it is to have people to do courses, to do write your for people who whether the first time was around somebody had breast cancer or you had a loved one who was sick or now I'm doing it, just have write your story down. And I was going to perform a story, my play for a class, and come back in and said, now write your story down. Just write it down. And again, the technique is don't worry about it being good or bad or anything, just write it and then read it. And within that group of people, we might find some people for whom it becomes natural and easy, others who, for whatever reason, doesn't work for. It's not going to work for everybody, and don't be not being judgmental about it. Improv is another way of doing it, but just tell your story, walk the stage, and just tell it. What comes out of my I think I started with this talk for 20 minutes, just stand up and do nothing, but just talk for 20 minutes. You'd be surprised what you have to say and learn from that. So give it a shot. I'm look more at people who are in their, I call it fourth age of life or older. And it could be probably true. I'm interested whether Alison, you focus on a younger cohort or people in the younger, because for me, I'm going to turn 80 in This is May, less than 2 months. I'll finish my, my 8th year. Could never have imagined this. And, I sometimes people get so stuck in their mind. I can't do that. Or this is impossible. I'm too old or too young. Encouraging people to let go and give it a shot. Um, and back to my friend Mabin, just walk on, just write your story, just give it a shot, and um, it'll be as good as it'll be, and nobody is judging it, but it can change you and your audiences. There are gifts in what you do, and what theater does for people, and it's gifts for the actors, particularly in this theater. What I do is I'm the one going telling the story I've gone through. My journey with my wife is she getting ready. How do you get ready to hold the one you love most in the world as they take their last breath? I had no friggin' idea, but I had to do it. And now maybe there's a gift in my time. I know there's a gift because I've heard enough feedback, but I didn't know it before I started. It was sort of therapy for me. So I know that's a lot of stuff, but um, I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
No, definitely. I know for me, like what you said about, reaching your audience, and my theater teacher, he always says, "How are you going to change your target?" And, for me, that was running through my head while I was writing my show. And, my main mission was just to inspire youth. Like, if we look at it from a Broadway perspective, because we did the night was performances by a bunch of Broadway kids. And I said, a lot of people think Broadway is so out of reach. But one of my closest friends, she was in high school and she found out that she was going to Broadway during her English class. She got a phone call. So Broadway isn't so far out of reach, and I always emphasize that Broadway is not the end all be all. But that's kind of what we were talking about at my show. I really wanted to inspire the youth and show them that your dreams aren't so far out of reach. Because, people would always tell me, oh, dreams come true. And, Broadway is such a big dream. You're never going to make it. But I really wanted to show people. I know that saying dreams come true is cheesy and corny, but it is so true that dreams don't work unless you do. And that was the biggest lesson I learned when I was writing my show because it was right there in front of me. All I had
Right.
to do was put in a little time and a little hard work, and I had the inspiration from my incredible friends, and I had my incredible family, and I had an amazing music director, and everyone was so supportive. And I really wanted to tell those kids out there that were watching, you can do it. Just
Yes.
a little bit of effort. But I also wanted to show their parents, support your kids on their journey because support is the root of this industry. I always say you can't do anything in this industry without support. So I wanted to show those parents, if your kids tell you that, hey, I want to be on Broadway one day, or I want to do my school show, don't laugh at them and tell them that theater is not a real career. Don't do that. Support them because they are going to find their wings, and trust me, they're going to fly. But not only are they going to fly, they're going to soar as they get older. My first show, I was 8 years old, and I played Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the musical. And that is an experience I will never forget. And I look at where I am today, with my podcast and the journey of inspiration through theater and my ties to Broadway and the incredible shows I've had the honor of being part of through my podcast. And I'm just so grateful because, if my parents never took me to go see shows when I was little, I always say it's the most full circle of my life. When I was 11 years old, Dear Evan Hansen came to Toronto, and I begged my parents, I said, I need to see this show. And my mom, being my mom, did her research and she saw the themes in the show exploring mental health and exploring suicide. And she said, you're 11 years old. I don't know if we want to do that just yet. But I begged and begged. And my parents said, you know what? You're mature. Let's do it. And I saw the show and the actor playing Evan, Robert Marcus, the way he made me feel. I looked at my mom at intermission and I said, I want to make him, I want to make people feel the way that he made me feel. And that was my official start into being like, okay, I want to do this professionally. I want to make people feel the way he made me feel. And all these years later, Robert is in my life. I've done classes with him. I've seen him in shows. I've followed his career. And the 50th episode of my show, I got to do with the actor who played Evan when I saw Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway. My first in person episode was actually filmed in between shows on the national tour of Dear Evan Hansen with two of the actors. This show is my reason. And, it gets so much backlash because of the story. And that's why I think it is so important to let those kids follow your dreams. Because if my parents would have said, "No, sorry, the show is not there for you yet," from an age level perspective, I wouldn't have had that feeling. Would not have had that feeling. And another full circle that my mom always likes to remind me of, which I have no recollection about, is she took me to see a show at our local theater, and I whispered in her ear, "That's gonna be me up on that stage one day." And 5 years later, I was doing the exact same show, the exact same choreography with the exact same people. So it is so incredible to expose your kids to the arts, and it can change a life because changed mine, and I don't wanna speak for you, but I think I can say it's changed yours, and that's why I'm so grateful for my podcast because you get to inspire through the arts, and you get to share these stories of how the arts have changed people's lives just by getting up on stage and saying a line or pressing play on a song and just dancing and seeing where the music takes you, or putting your pen towards paper and just drawing a little dot. I always love the book The Dot. If you haven't seen that, it's a little children's book, and this girl is complaining. She's like, "I can't draw," and her teacher says, "Just make a dot and see where it takes you." And at the end of the book, they make a museum of all of her different dots, and it's so beautiful. Pick up an
But
instrument, play a song, read sheet music. It is so beautiful to see how these stories can transform through the arts.
so do you know, I'm not know if you're aware of it, but I'm going to say it this way. You are just yes anding right
Exactly.
now. And I did have a low reaction to the phrase make somebody feel. We don't make anybody. Yes anding enables people to feel.
Yeah.
It gives them permission. It experiences um, and even the goal is for someone to walk in without an inherently predetermined, and people will walk in with what they walk in. Still, it's the yes ending. Yeah, all right, I'll try. I'll give it a shot, and let's see how I can do it. And it is such a way of life, and it's not just. It's for both the theater, the one on stage, and the one in the audience. Um, they listen, they experience it. Of course, there are always those critics, but yeah, with critics. But I'm just joking when I say that. Even critics need to, will eventually say the yes and anding is imagining and listening and thinking about something differently. And it's not, I'm not, I don't want to be naive and some things don't work in the light, but it is a way of life. And you're very fortunate, I think, in somehow discovering that, finding that. Uh, and it's wonderful. And your story is wonderful. And um, good for you. And thank you for, well, we were introduced by somebody. We were both on, was it Artivision, is what was it called?
Mhm.
And Delphi, give them a shout out, um, to tell our stories a little bit. It is, I think, we're both in some ways improbable. Very young woman doing all this with but this old guy with dementia. I hate that word. With Alzheimer's, a cognitive disorder, um, trying to find my way through old age, if you will, and a form of old age. Um, and it can help everyone who sees us and sees the stories we help present. So, and I'm energized by you too, because finding, we're there'll be people between us, but we're at different stages.
And I wanna kinda tie a ribbon. It's one of my favorite lyrics ever written. in theater, the incredible Lin-Manuel Miranda, because he's a genius. The final song of Hamilton, it really changed it. It's called, I'm sure you know, Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story?
Yes.
And after hearing that song, I made it my mission. I said, "Okay, if theater is my way of telling my story, how am I gonna leave that behind?" And I think seeing that, as I mentioned earlier, through Clouds and through Zach and his story and with you and your story, like, I'm in contact with Zach's mom, Laura. We speak pretty frequently. She was on the podcast, and I said to her, I said, "I'm so grateful that, your son was very vocal about his journey, and I'm the same way with you. I see so many parallels between both your journeys. And when you receive a diagnosis, there's no nice way to say this, so please forgive me. You and Zach, they weren't just like, okay, I received a diagnosis, I'm just gonna sit here and feel sorry for myself. Doing the exact opposite and getting up and leaving your mark because you don't know how much time you have left. And like with everyone in this world, it's who lives, who dies, who tells your story. So life is short and life is precious. So I always say, be that change and tell your story while you're able to. So I'm so grateful to you for being here, for creating this outlet and telling your story and for sharing it with me. I am so inspired by you and I'm so, so grateful. So thank you.
And I just want to, particularly on my end of it's okay to take a breath and wonder. So, look, Alzheimer's, it's in my play. He just told me I had Alzheimer's. It's not curable. There is no cure. I'm going to die. Does he say that? No. But and see, I said but. We don't say but. And you can give yourself a moment and keep and come back to what you said. Give it be in all this. Yes, tell your story so you can not tell your story, but I'm told that I'm probably doing well because I am doing this. And theater has all sorts of things, but you're amazing. Thank you for being um, gracious enough to do this podcast with me. I'm in good company on your podcast, and we're gonna cross-reference each other on the web. Uh, but you haven't done that yet.
Oh, I'm
But,
the luckiest. Thank you for being such an incredible inspiration.
well, thank you.